I would like to introduce our moderator for this next session. And before that, actually, so one thing that came up a few times in that prior session was what's it going to take to do all of this? You know, supply, demand. It's the people, right? You can't do this out without the people and the right people. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about now: the supply and demand of the workforce, and how that's going. So the name of this session is The Strongest Footing, the Future Space Workforce. And our moderator for this session today is Veronica Peregrine. Veronica is the Director of Engineering Career Services here at University of Maryland, and she is very much a people person. She has a passion for empowering college students and identifying opportunities and meaningful careers. Whether counseling engineering students or in individual appointments or working with employers to present workshops, she is responsible for the success of many, many students. And according to one student, she is an excellent counselor, mentor, coach, assistant, you name it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Veronica. Take it away. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, I know I have some folks in the very back of the room. There are plenty of seats up towards the front. If anybody has an empty seat, you want to raise your hand so anybody that's in the back can come on up. I really don't want anybody sitting in that very back row. It's really hard to see. All right, so I want to get started in introducing this panel and myself. Thank you for the generous introduction. Again, my name is Veronica Peregrine, Director of Engineering Career Services. I have been with the University of Maryland for about 20 years now, and within the Maryland system for almost 25 years. So I do love my Maryland schools. And with this particular panel, we're really hoping to identify the key challenges and opportunities that the industry should consider in attracting, engaging, and retaining employees in the future workforce. So we have a few questions that we'll be asking our panelists, but before we get started, I wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves because I think they'll probably do a better job of that than me. And within this introduction, I would love for them to just say, how did you get here? What do you do? And if feel free to add anything that encouraged you to get into the field. So I'll start with Eileen.
Hi, I'm Eileen. So I got my bachelor's degree right here at the University of Maryland, computer engineering. And then I also have a master's in space systems engineering from Johns Hopkins University. So I've always been interested in space. In my junior year, I got an internship at NASA Goddard where I was working on the GPSS program. Continued that through senior year, and then after I graduated, I started working at Northrop Grumman up in Baltimore. Didn't ask to be put in space, but they put me in space right away. So that's when I started working on embedded flight software systems. That really became my specialty. So I worked in flight software all throughout my time at Northrop, and then after about 5 years, I decided that I would like to do something new, and then went to an exciting new startup called Quantum Space, which is based in Rockville. A little closer. Thank you. I'm a little short. At Quantum Space, I am the lead flight software engineer. A little about what we do at Quantum Space. We're a brand new startup focused on cislunar and geo orbits. So we would like to build spacecraft that goes to those orbits, carries payloads there, and then also creates like a data network that will allow us to communicate rapidly between Earth and those far-reaching orbits. And we just launched our first spacecraft, Sentry, on March 4th. So very exciting stuff.
Thank you. Sadie?
Hey, I'm Sadie Duffy. I'm the CEO of a small business called Astralis Technologies, and we do science and technology support predominantly for NASA right now. I graduated with a degree in engineering from RIT, although I will not lie to you and tell you I'm a practicing engineer. I went immediately into high performance computing, which was sort of an interesting bridge to see, you know, not just the engineering piece, but what they're doing with the engineering data that comes with it and ultimately, you know, goes out to the world. So how I got to NASA, I will admit it, I am a super geek. As a kid, just loved NASA. I was middle school, like the one kid slogging through the after action report of Challenger. I read every biography of everybody that touched, the early days of Mercury on. So really, that is what brought me to NASA. And in my career, I've had the opportunity to really work with some amazing people in a lot of different agencies, honestly, DHS, FAA, DOD. But what continued to bring me back to NASA was not just that passion I had as a child, but also specifically, I won't lie, my heart's at Goddard because it is such an amazing place. Yes, they do amazing things in manned space, for sure. I won't lie either that roller coasters are super scary to me, so therefore I am never going on a launch. So never going to dog another center, but what's awesome to me about Goddard is that you get to see not only the engineers that can make things go and to say, oh my God, I can do this, or I can build this instrument, or I can do it in a different way. You also have people like the anomaly team on Hubble at Goddard who have been finding crazy creative ways to continue to get every ounce out of that mission. And then finally, the science support that you got at Goddard, where again, this is what we get that data down for. They are doing things with it to foundationally understand where we came from, where we're going, what we can do as a planet with the resources that we have. So that's why I'm here.
Hi everyone, I'm Sean Chait. So actually, recent title change. So from program manager back into systems engineering. So I'm currently the lead systems engineer for the HALO program, the Habitat and Logistics Outpost at Northrop Grumman. In terms of where I started my career, I'm a Georgia Tech grad. Through undergrad and grad school, various small sat programs and CubeSat programs. After leaving school, went to Orbital, now Northrop Grumman, working, Cygnus, the early COTS and CRS programs, and CRS2 as a GNC hardware engineer. From there, went more into systems engineering, into various, Artemis development programs. So over the last, 4 or 5 years, I've worked HLS, LTV, GLS, and also some, commercial space station CDFF activities, kind of the whole gamut of the commercial space and Artemis programs.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, Courtney Wilson wasn't able to join us today, but we have 3 great panelists. So our next question is, what motivates or excites you the most about the aerospace field over the next 10 to 15 years? Sean, can we have you start?
Yeah, so I think what motivates me and excites me the most about the next 10 years is what's happened in the last 10 years. So, when I look back to when I was in undergrad and grad school, commercial cargo wasn't a thing. SpaceX was not, launching reusable rockets on a regular basis. These large or small sat constellations where there are hundreds or thousands of satellites were all in conference papers and theoretical. None of these things really existed or were out there in a consistent manner. If you look at today, there are thousands and thousands of small sats out there. There are companies launching reusable rockets. There was a commercial lunar landing last month. So if you look at what's happened in that short period of time and kind of how things have accelerated, even just over the last 5 years, that makes me very excited for what's possible for the next 5, 10, 15 years, especially as we look towards Artemis and the eventual return to the eventual journey to Mars.
Great, thank you. Sadie?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. It kind of, to steal a little bit, it is the accessibility too. I mean, some of the technologies that we have now, they're now ubiquitous throughout, the kids are using these today, some of these technologies. And so thinking about, we wouldn't have applied them this way, but they would, because it's not what we thought about. I think back to, cassette tapes, right? And then they were replaced by CDs. Nobody even buys a CD anymore. Like if you do, it's retro and it's cool, but and then standing on the work that we've already done and what we can do going forward, right? Habitable Worlds is going to be amazing because we have done so much already and what we can do going forward.
Great, thank you. Eileen?
Yeah, so to go a bit off of what Sean said, I also am really excited looking back at the last 10 years of the space, how the next 10 years was going to revolutionize the industry. A few areas that I'm really excited about. I think one of the things is that I would love to see the industry evolve in terms of what companies are focusing on and what kind of problems they're looking to solve. Because I think right now looking at the industry, it's still very, it's either, very national security focused or, it's NASA contracting. I'd love to see the industry break out even more. There's lots of problems that we still need to solve, on Earth that could be, solved with space-focused solutions. And there's also, lots of science to be done in space, lots of really exciting discoveries. So I'd love to see the industry, branch out into more of those areas and see those areas be, profitable, but also areas that people are interested in looking at. And then also on the technology aspect, what I'm really excited to see is that I feel, in the past few years, space technology has been slowly catching up where, it used to be that hardware was like 10 to 30 years, behind what was, people were actually using on Earth. And then now we're slowly catching up on that where it's like, hey, I can send a flight computer with 16 gigabytes of RAM into space and not 32 megabytes. So it's really great to see that. And it really opens up, the sphere for computer vision in space, machine learning in space. Those kinds of things are really cool. So I'd love to see more of that in the future.
Great, thank you. So Eileen, this is your next question. What's a challenge or frustration you face as an early and our other panelists, mid-career professional, and how do you overcome it?
That's a great question. So one of the challenges I experienced right off the bat that I wasn't really expecting is that at least, when I started out working at Northrop, there were a lot of older, folks who were still in the technical sphere that I was working with, almost as an equal really, where we were both, programmers on the same program. And the management had really pushed for the modernization of the program on the software aspect. So it's like, we're using Git now, we're using Agile, these things that are like cool buzzwords that, the industry likes to see. And, the defense industry, which, historically kind of lags behind, FANG companies or things like that, they're like, oh, we have to catch up, we have to implement these things. So, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but then, a lot of these older, individuals who are very, intelligent, very good at their jobs, did a lot of great things in their career. They are really like lost by how like quickly they're trying to push these things. I had coworkers who, older coworkers who would email me or message me once a week being like, how do you do this thing in Git again? I don't remember, even though I told them last week. So it's a lot of like learning to speak the same language with them and like trying to, teach them as much as they're trying to teach you about these types of things. That's something that I really wasn't anticipating because, I expect that, the senior employees would be like helping me with everything and I would be like the lost little lamb. But turns out we have a lot of things to teach each other.
Thank you. And Sadie, as a mid-career professional, what challenges and frustrations do you face and how do you overcome it?
I appreciate the pivot mid-career. Thank you. I think there's one that's poignant right now, and I think it has to do with COVID. And so, this comes from me as a hiring manager, and what people are looking for in terms of what that work environment looks like. Because I know there is a push to it's kind of a push-pull of I want to work from home. I want to be at home. I want my jammies and my bunny slippers, and that's awesome. I won't lie. But on the same token, what I'm finding the challenge for between the teams are that other set of, just out of college or first couple of years engineer, they want to sit in a room with the hands-on engineer and say, I'm part of that team. I want to feel like I'm part of that team. So, you can do collaboration remotely. We all did it during that COVID period of time. And there are still ways, I believe, to do it. So I don't want to throw it in the trash as an experience because I think we learned a lot from it. But I think there is that challenge of making sure you're bridging the gap between being remote and being in person and having that as part of an identity that you collectively share.
Thank you. Sean.
Yeah, so I'll pivot off that a little bit actually from a different perspective because I think in terms of a lot of the early career folks, again, especially people that we've hired during COVID, I know a lot of folks saw lots of hiring for various programs in the last few years. It's actually the opposite challenge where I think some of those early career folks are very much tied to they want to work remote, they want to be permanently remote. And I think we have seen, I've seen firsthand in many cases where kind of the growth of those individuals I think is definitely hampered by the fact that they don't have that collaboration in the office. You know, the amount you learn sitting on an INT floor at 2 in the morning, troubleshooting a broken piece of hardware, you know, with a team of very experienced engineers, you're never necessarily going to recreate, you know, remotely from a home office. And I do appreciate, and I think we've all adapted to, you know, workplace flexibility and hybrid arrangements. But, you know, that's kind of a word of caution, I would say, for early career folks, is there definitely is that benefit of wandering the halls, walking into someone's office, asking questions, drawing something on the whiteboard, and figuring out, you know, how to solve a problem collaboratively. I think that is very important for early career growth.
Great, thank you. All right, so our next question, we'll go with Eileen first, but I want to kind of lay it out a little bit for everybody. What do you think is a common misconception about millennials or Gen Z in the workplace? And just for information, I had to look this up online. The boomer generation is 1946 to 1964. Gen X is 1965 to 1980. Our millennials were born in 1981 to 1996, and Gen Z was born in 1997 to 2012. And I did not know this next bit of information, but the next generation is called Alpha, and they were born in 2013, and that's going to be until 2025. So Eileen, what do you think is that common misconception about millennials or Gen Zs in the workplace?
Sure. So for clarification, I was born in 1996. So sometimes that, like you said, you know, I'm like right at the tail end of a millennial. And sometimes I've seen it where Gen Z starts in 1996. So kind of like in between. But like personally, I definitely identify a lot with more being a millennial. It's always been what I've been referred to as growing up. And you know, something that this question really made me think of, and it didn't happen in a professional workplace, but it did happen at this university, was one time I was in a class, and at some point the professor rolled up a projector and put a slide on it and started writing on it. And he said, "Oh, you millennials probably don't know what this is." And I was like, we were using projectors until high school. I don't know what you're talking about. We definitely know what that is. So yeah, this is a really common misconception I see about millennials. Like people who are older than us think we're basically like, you know, all Zoomers, you know, TikTok dancing something or other. But like the reality is a lot of us grew up with, you know, floppy disks and cassette tapes. And, you know, we really like lived the transition between, you know, this sort of lower technology time of our lives to like a really high tech time of our lives where, you know, everyone has phones and everything is a smart device. So it's like gives us a really interesting perspective, I think. And you know, something that a lot of other generations can't relate to, where we sort of, you know, appreciate the conveniences of technology, but also see the way that it's changed our lives like very significantly, and I think understand it a lot more so than some people. So that's definitely a really common misconception I see about them. So personally, you know, I try to embrace that, and really, you know, I'm always trying to be like, yeah, you know, smart devices, not the most secure thing, and you know, try to be educated on those kinds of things because you know, I can really feel the way that like technology has impacted my life, like in the way that I like grew up and became an adult in that kind of world.
Great, thank you. Sadie?
Yeah. So you ask about common misconception, and I think, again, kind of going back to experience as a hiring manager, we had a little bit of a debate when we prepped for this. I think a common misconception is that they're job hoppers, and that I see your smirk, and that you have them for a year at a time, and that's all you're ever going to get. So you just got to prep and know that that's what you're getting into. And I think the reason it's a misconception, if you look at it on paper, sometimes that may be true, but I think the misconception is why. And I think it's because we potentially are treating them like an older generation workforce or the next generation workforce, and we are giving them the benefits and the opportunities and the praise and feedback that worked before, but it doesn't work for them. And so they're leaving because we're not fulfilling their basic need, which is they want to be a part of what you're doing. And so I think that's why it's a misconception. Not that they are lazy or that they can't stay, it's that we are not necessarily engaging them in the way that they need to feel fulfilled.
Great. Sean?
Yeah, so I completely agree with that point. The challenge we see, again, very much kind of in more recent grads, is that, keeping that interest and kind of identifying, young, bright talent when you see it and keeping them enticed. It's not necessarily, someone coming out of school is going to be interested in doing that same job for 5 years. That can't be necessarily the expectation, and that they're going to grow and mature. It's going to be, I'm going to do this for 5 years and 5 years the next, and so on and so forth. If, where we've had success in capturing that talent is when you kind of have that conversation and recognize it, and rotate them through or provide new challenges such that they can grow and they feel a part of a team. Because I will say, working long duration development programs, I've seen plenty of Gen Zers who have a desire to be there the entirety of the program, who don't want to leave, but that's on the condition of they're given the right opportunity. They don't necessarily want to be doing that same job and that same thing from cradle to grave. It's, they want to get that, do that one piece, learn what they can, and move on to the next thing.
Sean, you kind of segue us into our next question, so I'm going to let you kind of continue on if you had anything else to add. And that question is, beyond pay, what are the things that helped attract and retain today's workforce and the future workforce?
Yeah, I think going along those same lines is kind of continual learning through, on the job training effectively. So, rotating through different challenges and different tasks. When someone's succeeding, and they're doing a very good job, there's definitely cases where sometimes they may view penalized if they're very good at that one thing, but maybe that's not their favorite thing in the world. And if you say you're on this for a couple of years, there are challenges. So when you have those conversations, and it's not, all right, I can move you next week, but there's an opportunity coming in 6 months, and we can maybe give you some other training outside your normal day-to-day job to get there. That's when I think we see the positive reaction, and we see better staff retention when those folks are able to go around, understand what they really like, and eventually, they'll get into their groove, and they may find the one exact thing that they want to do for the next 20 years. But definitely the early career folks, at least what I'm seeing, I don't know if others see the same thing, is they want a variety. Even if it's the same systems engineering or software, they still want to see a variety of things in that same field.
Absolutely. Sadie?
Yeah, I would say, definitely job satisfaction is a big piece of that and having that variety. But I think also looking at benefits packages and what I can offer holistically to an employee. It's been one of the nicest things about being able to create my own company is to look at those and say, okay, I'm going to try and pick and choose. And so even things like being able to adapt your benefits packages to people's phase of their life, right? So the things that are important to me as I have kids are not the same things as an early career. So looking at the potential, right, and obviously within the bounds of, the legality and that kind of thing, but having programs, things like instead of offering a 401k match, could I offer a student loan match so that people can apply that toward their student loan? And so, that helps them as they're in early career so that then they can go on to do those things like buy a house, have a family, get married, and then they're interested in the benefit, a different benefit package or the 401k heavily investment, things like that can kind of holistically give the employees what they need when they need it.
Great. And Eileen?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Benefits are a really important part of why people want to stay. And I think going off of what John was saying earlier, I think, when I was working at Northrop, I was working with a lot of people who had been at that same job for like 40 years of their life, just never having moved or changed. And I think the reason why it's, so much more rare to see that now is just that it doesn't give you the same amount of benefit now to stay in the same job for 40 years. You aren't really repaid for your loyalty, is the way I've heard it put. So, with that, if there's less incentive, to really stay there, then of course people will feel, more likely to move when they see an opportunity that's more interesting, more unique, gives them better, benefits or pay or whatever, right? So, that's something that, I really like companies to think more about is like when it comes to employee retention, like for younger folks, what they really care about. And like going back to like benefits, right? Exactly. Like younger folks have different benefits that they care about more. When I was at Northrop, I did my master's degree there through their EdAssist program. And in fact, the year I decided to start that, they actually cut EdAssist benefits so that you can only take 2 classes a year, basically. And the reason that they said that was that, oh, in our benefits survey, people rated EdAssist the lowest thing that they cared about, so we cut it. And it's like, well, all the older individuals, of course, they rated that low because they don't need those benefits. But then it really matters to the younger folks who want to get master's degrees while they're young. So it just doesn't make any sense if you're wondering why you can't retain any younger employees and then you cut the benefits that matter to them. So, there needs to be more thought put into, what younger employees really care about and what would matter to them and, what kind of things really cater to them. And it's probably not nap pods or ping pong tables, right? Those aren't really things that people actually care about. Like it'd be nice to have those and better healthcare, but I think in the end, most people would pick the healthcare and not the ping pong tables.
I'm going to add my own answer to this question in working with our engineering students at Maryland. Generally, our younger folks are looking for a sense of belonging, community. They want to have a safe space where they can ask questions. They're looking for an onboarding that is comprehensive. They're also looking for that to be maintained. Is there somebody that they can talk to if they have questions or concerns? I am a Gen X, and when I went to work, I was just told, well, this is the end result. This is what you have to work on. And that's not how this generation is looking at a job. They would like to have supports and be able to ask somebody questions and, brainstorm ideas, as well as, have that opportunity to maybe have a mentor. So that's going to lead me into my next question. Eileen, can you tell us about the role of professional mentors in your career? And if you didn't have a mentor, what support would you have liked to see within your organization relating to mentors?
Yeah, sure. So I think I actually had a fantastic professional mentor early in my career. He was my flight software lead, and he was a fantastic professional mentor, and I learned quite a bit from him. But, we weren't, officially in a mentorship program or anything like that. I just consider him my mentor because of how much we worked together and, how much I learned from him. There was a professional mentorship program that I was enrolled in, but my mentor was like really just too busy all the time to ever meet with me, which was kind of disappointing. And I think in the end, I really benefited more from the relationship that I spent every day, working with that person and learning from them, and not from someone who was like, in a different career position, very busy, and like didn't really have a lot of time to interact. I totally see the value of having a mentor who's like in a different field, in a different like job position, who can give like a different insight. But unfortunately, that's not really something that I had the opportunity to have. And most of the, the people I really looked up to were people who I worked with, in my field, other fellow flight software engineers or like systems engineers who were working on, developing flight software. So what I would really love to see more, focus on providing that kind of mentorship in workplaces. I think this is especially important in larger workplaces, where there's a really wide range of individuals with different experience levels that could potentially provide valuable information to new folks in the workplace. And in the kind of startup environment where I work now, I'm working a lot more directly with everyone because our company is only like 25 people, right? So I get a lot more direct interaction with everyone in the company, all the way up to the executives who I still interact with on a daily basis. So that kind of like direct interaction where you're working with them on a day-to-day, I think provides like a much more valuable like mentorship experience from like the experiences that I've had.
Great, thank you. Sadie?
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat in terms of mentors. I've worked in large corporations that have had formal mentor programs, and they're challenging, right? They're challenging for the companies to set up, I recognize, because they do tend to pick people as mentors who are the ones that are absolutely the busiest humans on the planet. And it's, some metric, you're the best, therefore you must be able to add that on. I do find that I've had people in my career that have just been fantastic open door people that, the first thing you are able to ask them is, hey, I have this really stupid question that I didn't want to ask in a meeting. And they're the ones that you're okay to ask and they don't make you feel bad. And so, throughout my career, I've tried to be that person for others to try to make sure that I am hey, there are no stupid questions. Like for real, there are stupid questions, but it's okay. You can ask them anyway. But to try to do that, but I think maybe as corporations, what we need to do more is try to find ways that we recognize the people that are willing to do that or that can do that. So that way there's that positive reinforcement that it's okay to go talk to these people. It's okay to be that person for someone else, in terms of mentorship. So.
Yeah,
Sean?
so
Go ahead,
so I'll
Sean.
say I wouldn't necessarily have had like call it a formal mentorship program, and I do agree with kind of some of those challenges of having a structured program. But I will say I've had some very, very talented mentors during my career, and where those folks come from are the people who I work with on a day-to-day basis, people with 20, 30, 40 years more experience than me. And I think that's where when it's someone that you're injected into the workplace just by the nature of your job, that's where I think you really see the lessons learned, especially if it's an individual who, will let you struggle a bit, help you push along the way, but kind of let you find your own path. But I do think for anyone to really be successful and really grow, finding that individual or set of individuals that you can rely on in your day to day who can help mentor and grow you, not just in kind of doing your run of the mill tasking, but also how to deal with failure and how to get through the challenges of this industry. Because as we all probably know in this room, any program you're on, something will go wrong, whether it's in design, whether it's in tests, whether you're sitting on console for operations and there's an anomaly that you need to resolve in the next 30 minutes or the mission's lost. How you get through those, you can learn on your own through building those scars yourself, but also hearing those stories and getting those lessons from folks who have been through it and have experienced that and figure out their own way to solve those problems, I think is really beneficial. And again, the only way I think you really hear those stories is that hallway conversation of, oh, this was nothing because 20 years ago this is what happened, and it was 10 times worse. So I really think the day to day, in your normal job, mentor is really key to successful growth.
I'm going to emphasize that having a formal mentor program, it sounds like can be really difficult. However, encouraging coffee chats and networking and just chatting, having an open door policy and conversations can really do a lot to build some of those informal mentors that, maybe it's not a long-term situation, but somebody who I know that person knows the answer to this, and I feel comfortable in chatting with them because I had this coffee, chat when I first started. Last year, my daughter, who is a Maryland student and had an internship, her employer challenged her to have 100 coffee chats over the summer. I'm not saying that you have to do that with your new employees, but I think that is very telling in the sense of that organization is really emphasizing the fact that you need to get to know more than just your team, as well as others within the organization. So our next question is, what is your final bit of advice in helping leadership adapt to the modern workforce requirements and hiring?
Okay, sure, I'll go first. Yeah, I think the main thing is really just understanding that what millennials are looking for in a workplace is not really the same as what previous generations have looked for. And I think going forward into Zoomers are entering the workforce now. My brother's, he's 4 years younger than me. He's been working for 2 years. When I think about that, I'm like, oh no. But going back on what we've discussed before, like our priorities are really different. What we're looking at of a job is really different. A lot of people my age, millennials, I've seen they value work-life balance, maybe more so than, previous generations have. We're looking for different things, and, we're looking for the right workplace that will really understand, why we value these things, and that would be like the greatest place to work for us. So, not just benefits, not just pay, but the right tone, the right camaraderie, the right support, the right work-life balance, and just working with a more diverse group of individuals, I think, is something that a lot of us really value as well. Seeing more viewpoints than just the same thing over and over again is something that I would really like to see out of more modern workplaces. So.
Great, thanks. Sadie?
I think my opportunity kind of piggybacks on something that actually Senator Van Hollen was at the Maryland Space Business Roundtable yesterday, and he said success comes from the combination of talent and opportunity. And so opportunity is not just an open position, it's the opportunity to speak the same language with that employee and be patient and be open-minded about making changes to how you do business. And I think it comes from, several of us mentioned, you are learning things coming out of college that maybe don't directly apply like they did in the book, but they definitely apply. And then, the workforce that's there today, being able to be open-minded and say, I wouldn't do it that way but I can see how it would be helpful. So providing that opportunity, not just for a job, but for a partnership. I think that would be my advice.
Great.
Yeah, I think along a similar point, just have the dialogue and have the open communication. There are going to be some things that you just don't agree on, that, different generations do things differently, and one may not get the other and the reason behind it. But typically when you go have that open conversation rather than, this is how it's been, this is how it's going to be, you can figure out the pros and cons and the benefits of each side. Because, there are some things about how older generations have done things that may be more efficient, and there's a reason they're there, and there's tried and true, but there's also things that are new, and going back to, things like agile and new approaches and new technology that, if you go and have the conversation, you can kind of figure out the best of both worlds. And when you're in a workplace where all these different generations are working together, that's really key. And same goes for just, benefits and what is important to employees, is just having that conversation of there's never going to be a solution where all of your millennials and Gen Zers are going to be happy and all of your baby boomers are going to be happy. I think we all realize that that's not going to be the case. But if you have that open dialogue, I think you can get to a place where, at least for your workplace, it works for your team, and you can get to that dynamic that allows you to go and execute.
So to add to that, generally this generation is looking for some things like educational assistance, student loan repayments. So having a dialogue, like our panelists had mentioned, find out what it is that this generation, this future workforce is looking for. Today on our campus, we're having a mental health crisis. And so when we say the words work-life balance, sometimes we just dismiss it as, oh, well, they just want to work less hours. They only want to work 3 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever. But perhaps it's just, having mental health assistance and making sure that you're just providing the supports that are there. Flexible work schedule if that person has a family. So opening that communication, I think, is really going to be key. I also wanted, as we're kind of wrapping up, we're going to go into the question mode, but I just wanted to let everybody know that if you are interested in getting a Maryland engineer, I'll leave my business cards at the registration area so that you can chat with me about recruiting a Maryland grad. But now I wanted to give an opportunity for folks to ask our panelists some questions. There's going to be some folks walking around with microphones. Please feel free to kind of wave your hand so that they can walk over to you. As our previous moderator said, we have some very bright lights, and it's really hard for me to see beyond the second row. So I'm going to just trust that once you get that microphone, you kind of go ahead and start with your question.
Hello, I'm over here.
Thank you so much.
I'll wave my hand
Actually see where
wildly. Yes, I'm Christine Hartzell from University of Maryland. So one of my questions is, how do you think the next generation workforce is going to be using generative AI like ChatGPT while they're doing their engineering and science work?
Who wants to take that on? Eileen?
Yeah, I definitely have comments about this. So when I mentioned earlier that, I've seen a lot of millennials like myself, we kind of embrace technology, but are also distrustful of a lot of it. Personally, I would put stuff like ChatGPT under that. I see the role that it plays, and I see the way that people want to use it. But generally, I think that if you're depending on ChatGPT to, generate writing for you in the workplace, I would not consider that to be necessarily a good thing. And we actually did have an issue with this in our internship program at our company, where we had an intern who was basically allowing ChatGPT to do everything for him, including write code. And that did not fly, unfortunately. I'm seeing, a lot of concerns about students using ChatGPT to like write their essays and things like that. Obviously, I think that is a huge issue. People should be using their own words to convey their own ideas and not, presenting work that is not their own. And to me, that applies in the workplace as well. I just think it's dishonest. However, I do see, the value of using ChatGPT as a tool. I've seen people use it to like ask questions, like basically instead of Googling it, they'll like ask ChatGPT a question, and the ChatGPT will give them an answer that's like easier to read than Google. You don't have to like comb through a bunch of websites to find the answer. So I see the value of using it as a tool like that. The only thing, I would be cautious because, when you're like Googling things traditionally and you're like looking through websites and stuff, you kind of learn, how to like see what is, reliable and true, like based on, just how the website looks and like other context clues and things like that, versus with ChatGPT, you're not really sure what kind of information it's giving you. So like with ChatGPT, one of those old sayings like trust but verify, right? Like that it's really like something that you can actually rely on. And honestly, I would say don't trust it. But that's just my personal opinion.
Any other?
Yeah, I would say, first off, I know there's some people in the proposal world that are starting to use it to write their proposals, and I'll be interested to see how that works out. But I think the other thing to be really super careful, not just the ChatGPT and that it's not really your ideas, it's someone else's, but it's also bias in the system of recognizing when you see not just ChatGPT, because that's obviously language, but even algorithm development using AI and looking at the bias inherent in your science algorithm, and what the conclusions that you draw from your research or you draw from your science or you draw from the technology that you're working on. Be super, super careful, because even you as a person, you feel, oh, I have no bias, but you do. And it's based on where you grew up. It's based on who you interact with. It's based on your colleagues and their concerns. So I think it's, the advice is be very, very careful of that bias and aware of that bias and how you can sort of use a super powerful tool, because it is powerful in a way that's actually helpful and meaningful to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so I think I've had a little different experience, and I do agree it's going to take a lot of time for industry to adapt and figure out how, it's another tool and how you actually go use the tool. because from the application I've actually seen on an IRAD I had a year or two ago, not Chat GPT, but a similar type AI, were actually used a bunch of publicly available documentation to go write an attitude control system specification. And I will say, I think we were all thoroughly shocked at the quality of that specification that came out at the end of the day. Obviously, you have to go through and there's verification that you need to do and make sure the end result is correct. But taking again just industry standards and other publicly available documentation and coming out with that in a product was very surprising to us. Now that being said, how you go adapt a tool like that, it's, again, there's still the human element, there's still the engineer, and yes, very much what you feed into it is very much dependent on what you're going to get out of it. But there are other potential benefits, again, in the requirements world, where you're going through and you're looking at specifications and doing your flow down to lower level, even as a sanity check of, did I do it right, as an independent verification of the human came with this answer. If with the AI comes out with an equivalent answer, that's a good check. But if they come out to a very different solution set, that may give you pause and go back and think about it. Now, how that gets rolled into large development programs and becomes accessible industry wide, especially if you're looking at the commercial or DoD side, there's a long way to go there. But I think there are future benefits in that space. It'll take time to get there, and you need to learn what works and what doesn't work. But I think eventually you'll see it more commonplace.
I'd also like to add that there are some employers, if I have some students in here, that are screening out if it looks like you've used Chat GPT to write your cover letter, to write your bullet points on your resume. So I would really caution you. There are appropriate opportunities to use the technology. Suppose you said, I'm preparing for an interview with SpaceX. What sorts of interview questions might I be asked for X role? And you get those types of interview questions. So it really depends on how you're using the technology and preparing. So definitely, if I have any students in here, talk to your career services advisor, and we can help you with, guide you along with that. And, any other questions?
Yeah, one right here in the middle.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
What would you do to support any students trying to break into industry that's worried about the skyrocketing highest cost of living we have seen in a long time?
Who wants to
So-
start with that one?
So I can start with that because
Okay.
we definitely see the challenge. So I'm relatively local. The site I'm at is in Dulles, Virginia, so Northern Virginia, obviously a very, very expensive area. For some of our other sites are also in Redondo Beach, Southern California. There's definitely a challenge, especially when you're early career and you're going and you want to try to buy a house. I was very lucky. I bought a house right before COVID. If I bought a house now, I don't know if that'd be the the same situation. Unfortunately, what we're doing is it means we're gravitating towards sites and expanding in sites where there is a lower cost of living, because that's such a big impact into recruiting talent. It is very hard to, especially if you're local to where you're competing with big technology companies, where it's very different margins, very different business cases, and they're able to afford a much higher salary than what you may expect in our industry. It's very challenging if you're co-located in those areas to really make it sustainable, especially for early career folks. So at least for us, I think we are seeing that our expansions are gravitating towards those lower cost of living areas for that reason.
I'm actually going to use the Goddard RFI to put a hostel in. Yeah. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah, that is a challenge. I mean, I think, and it kind of flies in the face of what we said earlier about being connected. I mean, there are definitely areas geographically in the country that are probably untapped markets for aerospace because they want to live near their family, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, or wherever. Um, yeah, I wish I had a great answer for this, you guys. I don't. It's more just making sure that, you know, you're as supportive as you possibly can, in terms of flexibility, you know, with drive times, or, you know, if you need a work schedule that says, hey, I need to start before traffic starts and end before traffic begins again, then having that flexibility to make sure that you can allow for it so that they can do that commute from someplace that's a little cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with everything that's been said. You know, it's really on the, you know, if the employer isn't offering a salary that's livable in the area where the individual needs to live to work there, then, you know, of course, they can't expect to hire anyone, or at least they're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna hire anyone who, you know, may not have outside support, for example, and can, you know, therefore afford to live there, or you know, you might end up in situations where, you know, someone, you might only be able to hire like you know, remote working people who live in lower cost of living areas, who can afford to work for that kind of salary. So, you know, what it really comes down to on the employer side with making sure that what they're offering is competitive and livable. On the side of someone trying to break into the industry who's like looking around, you know, do your research on what, you know, your worth is, like know how much your worth is, and understand that you should be negotiating on your salary, understand the best way to do that. There's plenty of resources online, but definitely like know how much you're worth, and make sure that that worth is something that, based on where you're planning to live, is survivable with, and you know how to negotiate, and make sure that you're never undercutting yourself, because you're your best advocate.
Great, thanks. I'd like to add to that for our students who are in internships and developing an infrastructure for them to have roommates with fellow interns or co-op students, in addition to perhaps having a transportation stipend in order for them to maybe travel outside of the DC area and get in there. I think those two things will help you build a pipeline for them to, you know, want to move on for full-time recruitment, because generally when you are looking to hire, you look first at your intern workforce, and that's how you can kind of pull them into the fray and make sure that they kind of understand the wonderful culture of your organization.
Yeah, so I've been hearing a lot about like packages for employment, and also someone mentioned like high cost of living. So like my question is, with like a lot more women coming into the space workforce and it becoming a lot more diverse, are there plans in place by like these companies to increase like family leave or things that are more like considered like women's issues related to like reproductive freedom, to ensure that women can get into this workforce and stay in this workforce without having too much of a hit to their career due to having children, if that is their choice?
I'll take that. And it's kind of a funny story. I remember earlier in my career when I had my very first, I was having my first child, and I missed a meeting for a doctor's appointment, and I literally got chewed out by another woman who said, "You've taken us back 20 years by missing this meeting." And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's crazy. So yes, the short answer is yes. I mean, obviously looking at, but also, I mean, being honest, it's equitable leave, right? Because if we look at, you know, the female workforce, traditionally has had a lot of responsibility, but the male workforce does too. And we want to give them equal opportunity to be able to take time with their new child, or to be able to have that flexibility to take doctor's appointments. I can't change the world, but, you know, trying to make sure that, yeah, we recognize that, you know, people with families have different priorities. Honestly, work is sometimes a means to an end at that point. So we try to make sure the benefits packages are equitable, we're as flexible as we possibly can. And it comes down to culture. Is a culture of, I am not going to shame you because you have a doctor's appointment. I'm not going to shame you because you have a sick kid. That I think that comes down to company culture as much as anything.
Yeah, I will say, I think in terms of benefits, you know, at least what I've seen is I think it's definitely trending towards more benefits rather than fewer, especially when we talk about like parental leave and things like that. I think everyone generally seems to be going in one direction there in terms of paid leave and flexibility. Yeah, I think in general everyone is trending in that direction, and honestly that was a good thing I think out of COVID, because before COVID I need to I have a sick kid at home, I need to work from home. That was a lot more challenging because it was like, all right, who actually had a WebEx account, who could go set up a dial-in for this meeting for you to attend? And now that's kind of the norm where it's, yep, I have a sick kid, I have a doctor's appointment, I need to work from home for the morning. No big deal. You pick up, whatever you need to do, on your own schedule. I think at this point that's very much the norm. And at least in my experience, I don't really see any pushback or any challenges there.
So my comment, based on being a person who has very little control over, unfortunately, the amount of benefits that my company provides or anything, the reality of the situation, right, is that a lot of these, norms about parental leave and flexibility and things like that are very much like rooted in the culture of the workforce in the United States. So, especially with big companies, you don't see a lot of them like really pushing to like massively break the mold on that front, because it is the norm, it is what's accepted. So they don't see any reason or impetus to like offer anything that's like massively better than what is nationally offered by most companies. So as a person, you have to, as a person who's looking for an employer, you have to consider what's important to you, what kind of environment you want to work in. If you're able to find, a company that offers much better benefits, then that can be a tick for you, and a reason why that company is hiring more people. So the best you can do is if you're in the workforce, advocate to your company the benefits that you would like to see, especially in a group. If it's a group advocating, even better. And just recognize that it's going to be very slow change on that part. I think we are seeing change, but it's going to be very, very slow.
And from my perspective, we've definitely had the theme of retaining employees and wanting to see folks not move on. So how can we do that? It's creating a culture where there is flexible leave time. It can be really expensive to find a new employee that's right. And you have somebody right in front of you that's trained, that's doing a great job, but perhaps needs to have a flexible schedule in order to take care of some family needs. If you want to hold on to that person, that's going to help your bottom line in the end, because they're that great employee, and that will encourage loyalty when you have a culture like that. All right, I think we're ending up right on time. Do we have any other questions?
One more quick question and quick
Sure.
answers.
Make this very quick, but it's a very important question. When people, on the topic of ethics, people see shortcuts that could cost lives with quality or whatever. You've heard about whistleblowers, and some of these whistleblowers lose their lives. What safety, like if someone's going to be a whistleblower, it would make sense if they share their concern and evidence with multiple other people, so that if there's less threat of one person going down and paying the cost for that. Anyone have a comment on that?
My only comment on that is that I agree. We all have an obligation to call out issues in our workforce that we think could cause a loss of life. I totally agree with that. In terms of protecting yourself, I mean, I think the scenarios that people in which people lose their lives are very sad. But that should just not be what's happening. right? So I don't know if that's necessarily a burden that we can take on as people when that shouldn't just not, it should just not be the case. That is like the threat that people face as a result of whistleblowing.
Sadie?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are definitely, formal whistleblower protections. Comes back down to company culture. I mean, absolutely, there's no way or no reason you should have any kind of shortcut that has those kinds of extreme outcomes. I know it's sort of business, people are in it to make money, but there is a limit, and there has to be a limit. So.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, a lot of at least large corporations, have, internal anonymous whistleblower type hotlines, but there's also always, depending on the line of work, various government, government whistleblower, hotlines and agencies that you can reach out to in the event that something like that does occur.
So I think in order to create a safe environment, perhaps, relooking at those policies, how to, create an environment where you feel as though that person can safely address concerns and do that in a way in which there are no repercussions for them. All right, I think we are at time. So thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you so much to our panelists. They did such a good job. They deserve another round of applause. All right, everybody. All right. Hello, everybody. I am Valentina Cruz. I am currently an undergraduate student at the University of Maryland, majoring in aerospace engineering. I'm originally from Calvert County, Maryland. I don't know if any of you know where that is. It's kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And I look forward to a career in propulsion, specifically like alternatives with electric and plasma. Also, I'm free to hire, so just give me a call. We'll now take a short break with snacks and beverages in the atrium. Enjoy networking and building new connections, and please come back within 40 minutes for our next session, Space Weather 2040. Thank you.